All right, we'd like to dedicate this session of learning for Refuah Shalema for Karen Or Bat Sarah, B'toch Shar Cholei Amo Yisrael. I just wanted to make an addendum to the last lesson that we learned. The last piece in the Alshech HaKadosh that we learned was regarding the birth of Cain and Havel. Cain and Havel, we said that there was a selection that Chava experienced in her birth. She experienced that Cain was the embodiment of the evil that was infected by the snake within man. And therefore Havel came out completely pure. So we talked about this selection process, this bifurcation of the evil that man was infected with the next in the next generation, with the good. And we talked about this phenomenon by the Avot, by Avraham, right? There was a Yishmael before there was a Yitzchak. And by Yaakov there was an Esav before there was by Yitzchak there was a Yaakov before, there was an Esav before Yaakov. We talked about why the firstborn would be the negativity that has to be expelled first in order for the next child to be refined. So we noted this phenomenon that the later child is always the purified product. So I wanted to note that this is very, very important in understanding the concept of Bechora, of the firstborn, which becomes very, very important in the Chumash, both in Sefer Bereshit and especially in Sefer Shemos, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu articulates to Moshe Rabbeinu that this whole program of the Golus Mitzrayim, of the children of the Avot and their eventual Geula, is to spawn a nation that is called Beni Bechori Yisrael, my child, my firstborn Israel. And indeed, in the with the inception of the Jewish people upon their release from the Galut in Mitzrayim, we know that it is really the Makot Bechorot, the plague of the killing of the Egyptian firstborn, as a selection to be able to proclaim that Am Yisrael is God's firstborn, is the denouement, the height, the climax of the plagues. And indeed, at the end over there in Parshat Bo, we're given one of the parshiot that appears in our tefillin is the sanctity of all firstborn in Am Yisrael. And the idea of the firstborn seems to be predicated on this idea that we were talking about in the Alshech, that once this purification is complete, meaning if the firstborn child is always the negativity that's being filtered out first, so you see when that process is finally done, the filtering is no longer necessary, and we achieve a Yaakov Avinu, so to speak, who now all his children are holy, right? It says that Yaakov Avinu had the 12 Shvatim, they're all called Shiftei Ka, that Yaakov Avinu, right, his Mita Shalem, all his children, his issue are complete. So that means that filtering process is over. So by definition, during the filtering process, the hallmark of the filtering process is that the firstborn son is always going to be the evil. As long as there's evil that needs to be filtered out, it's always obviously going to be in the firstborn, like the Alshech noted by Cain. Once you're done with it, the mark that you're done with that process is that now all your firstborns are pure. So the first time that there was a firstborn that is pure, that means that notes that it's the end of the process. And the celebration of Am Yisrael is that they are the refined komets, the refined demographic on behalf of all of humanity that are pure. They're called the Bechor, to signify that it's at that stage of their emergence in history that there's a level of humanity now that has been totally refined to be capable of being Adam Rishon before the sin. Okay, so that's one note. And the other note that I wanted to point out in regards to the last piece we learned is that we said that Cain was pure evil, and yet at the end of the piece, the Alshech HaKadosh notes And if you need to be reminded, you can go back to the previous lesson. The Alshech notes that ultimately Cain is reincarnated somehow in Yisro, in Jethro, who is a huge tzaddik. He has a whole parsha named after him, and he has innovations to the legacy of the Jewish people. So what's fascinating is it notes that the relationship of Moshe and Yisro was an elevation and a tikkun of the relationship of Havel and Cain. And I just wanted to note that if we're saying that Cain is totally evil, and yet somehow he ends up Yisro, who is such a big tzaddik, I wanted to note that this is a hallmark of God's leading history. It's also another sign of this refinement, that there is no one that is lost. We say there's a pasuk that says, well, we say it in the tefillot of Yom Kippur, it says, Bal yidach mimenu nidach, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't allow any soul to ultimately to stay away from him, that he'll do everything he can to bring every single spark closer and refined ultimately to tshuva. And you see this by the end of the last piece, that the Alshech notes that even though Cain is completely evil, and at the end, the relationship between Cain and Havel is elevated through the relationship between Moshe and Yisro. So Yisro, who is, as we noted, such a big tzaddik, and all his innovations into the legacy of the Jewish people, right, are divinely, they're promoted by God in the Chumash. And you see that even though Cain, who, as stated in the beginning of the Alshech's comments on the psukim regarding his birth, that he was completely evil, yet he ends up to be a complete tzaddik. So that's the second note that I wanted to make in regards to the last lesson we learned. Okay, so now we're going to continue with the story of Cain and Havel. We're going to talk about their sacrifices. So let's look at the verse. Okay, we are in Perek Dalet, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so here it goes. Perek Dalet, Pasuk Dalet. Okay. Actually, we're going to go to Pasuk Gimel. So we noted right beforehand that Cain is an agrarian, he's an agriculturalist, and Havel sees after livestock, and he takes care and shepherds the flocks. Okay, Perek Dalet, Pasuk Dalet. Vayhi miketz yamim. Okay, so this is a very interesting phrase, but literally it means, and it was at the end of days.
What does that mean?
So the Zohar Kodesh says that it means that it was Rosh Hashanah.
Oh.
But that's, I mean, there are all kinds of ways to understand that, but here we'll just say over here, after a period of time. That's how the Art School translates it. Vayhi miketz yamim, at a certain point, after a period of time, Vayavei Cain mipri ha'adama mincha l'Adonai. And Cain brought from the fruits of the earth, the yield of his farming, he brought an offering to God. Vehevel hevi gamhu, and Havel brought also mibchorot sono, from the choicest of his flock, umechel vehen, and from their fats. Vayisha Adonai al Havel ve'el minchato, and God turned, meaning he took note. He turned his face to accept the offering of Havel, or rather the pasuk says, and God turned to Havel and to his offering, vel Cain vel minchato lo sha'a, but to Cain and to his offering God did not turn. Vayichar leCain ma'od, and Cain was very angry. Vayiplu panav, and his face fell. Okay, there's a lot going on here. So we're going to note some things. Okay. So it says that Cain brought from the fruit of the earth an offering to God. And then the next verse says, and Havel also brought. So it says, Vehevel hevi, and Havel brought, but it says, Gam hu, also him, which is very superfluous. It could have just said, and also Havel brought. V'gam, right, hevi Havel. But instead it says, Vayave hevi, Vehevel hevi, and Havel brought, Gam hu, him also. What's that? Mibchorot sono, and then it says from the choicest of his flocks, and from their fats. But if you note by Cain, it just says he brought from the offerings of the earth. But Havel, it says, he brought from the choicest. It doesn't say he brought from his flocks, he brought from the choicest. It doesn't say that Cain brought from the choicest. Okay? And then it says that God turned to Havel and to his offering. Why doesn't it say, and God turned to Havel? Or why doesn't it say, and God turned to Havel's offering? Why does it say, and God turned to Havel and to his offering? Right? But to Cain and his offering, why does the pasuk seem to make the person who brings the offering and the offering itself separate issues? Right? Okay, and then when it says that Cain gets angry, which it says very angry, it says that he falls on his face, and the question is what's going on there? What's the drama with him falling on his face? Okay, so did you get those questions? Very fascinating. Psukim, let's see what the Alshech HaKadosh has to say. Okay, so we are on page Nun Zayin in my edition, second paragraph on the first column on the page. Vayimiketz. Okay. Ro'ei lasim lev. It is worth noting. Ma nishtanu minchotehem. How were their offerings different? Zeh mipri ha'adama v'zeh mehatzon. Just basically, one brought from the fruit of the earth. Cain brought from whatever he produced in his yield, and it says that Havel brought from the choicest of his flocks. So what is the difference between one bringing? How do you contrast the two? Or rather compare them when one is from the order of species of the vegetable and the other from the living, right? And if it's just that each one brought from their particular craft, whatever career they took, right? Lama ne'esham Cain. Why would God prefer Havel over Cain? Why wouldn't all things be equal? Why does there seem to be some sort of objective selection of Havel over Cain here? And he seems to contrast, right, the flock over the fruits of the earth. Okay, we'll get into that. Okay, ve'od, and further, Amro, the verse says, ve'hevel hevi gamhu, right, and Havel also brought. But it could have just said, ve'gam hevel hevi. Why does it say gamhu, him also? Very superfluous. Right? Ki amro gam hu, when the verse says him also, hu miutar, the hu is extra. Ve'od, and another question. Amro, the verse says, el havel ve'el minchato. We noted how the verse seems to distinguish between the person bringing the offering and the offering itself. It says that God turned to Havel and to his offering, but to Cain and to his offering, God did not turn. Why does the pasuk need to break things down like that? Shahayalo lomar, the verse could have said, el minchat Havel, right, to the offering of Havel. It doesn't have to say to Havel and to his offering. V'chein amro ve'el Cain ve'el minchato lo sha. And like also by Cain, it says that God did not turn to Cain or his offering. Ki amro el Cain hu miutar. Why does it have to say that God didn't turn to Cain? V'ayelo lomar, it should have said ve'el minchat Cain lo sha. And God did not turn to Cain's offering. Right? It's making a point that God didn't turn to Cain or his offering. Ve'od, and another question. Amro, it says finally at the end, when it says that Cain was very angry, it says vayiplu fanav, that his face fell. Ki ech nefilas panim, how is it that the falling of a face, so deked, is appropriate b'davar zeh, regarding this story? What's going on here? Ve'lo od, and not only that, but God seems to separate it into two separate issues. Ba'amro, when he says in the next pasuk, Lama charalecha, why are you angry? God asks Cain, why are you angry? V'lama naflu fanecha, and why is your face fallen? It seems to say that don't understand this nefilas apayim, this falling of the face, as a natural reaction to being angry, but rather it's two separate, distinct issues. V'nira hakol davar echad, but we would have thought that it's one issue. Ve'od, and another question, amro, right? Okay, so I didn't read these verses. I'm going to read them. Okay, so God addresses Cain's fallen mood, and he says, Vayomar Adonai el Cain, and Havaya says to Cain, Lama charalach, why are you angry? V'lama naflu fanecha, and why is your face fallen? Halo, behold, im tetiv se'et. If you get better, if you improve, you'll be forgiven. However, V'im lo, if you do not improve, v'im lo tetiv, if you do not improve yourself, lapetach chatas rovetz. Sin rests at your door. It crouches at your door. Ve'elecha teshukato, and to him will be your desire. Ve'ata timshal bo, but you will conquer over it. You will conquer him. Okay? Its desires towards you. It desires you, yet you can conquer it. So what's this whole pep talk? Okay? So first God says, why are you angry and why is your face fallen? And then, what does God mean when he says that sin is crouching at the door? It's the opposite. Okay, so he's saying, the Alshech is saying, God says here to Cain, listen, it's important for you to know that you have a Yetzer Hara inside of you, and you have to fight it and improve yourself, and there's two ways you can go. You can succumb to it, or you can subjugate it. And your job is to subjugate it. And this is a bar mitzvah speech. This is a speech that you give to somebody when they're starting off, right? So, meaning, this is not the moment where the Yetzer Hara now is inside of Cain, and Cain has to be told how to fight it. That's been going on since he was born, right? It's not from here on end. All the way in the inception of a person's life, in the beginning of their story, sin is crouching at the door. Be'et haleda, from the second that they're born, as the Gemara notes, that a person's Yetzer Hara is given to them from when they're born, and their Yetzer Tov only comes in when they begin to be chayav in mitzvot, at their bar mitzvah. Then it's appropriate to say that it is time for a person to improve themselves. And then following it says, and to you its desire will be, meaning it's trying to conquer you, this sin, but you will rule over him. They seem to be words that are totally lacking in, they seem to be meaningless here. They're not understood. They don't seem to be relevant at all. Okay? So those are the verses, and those are our questions. Here we go. Amnam. Hine hamincha asher yuva laHashem ein ish yachol lahavi davar ra'ui elav yitbarach. Okay, so first you have to know that regarding the concept of sacrifices at all, when you bring an offering to God, hamincha asher yuva laHashem, the offering that is brought to God, ein ish yachol lahavi davar, a person cannot bring something ra'ui elav yitbarach. There is nothing worthy of God that you could give him. The whole idea of offering something to God is questionable, dubious, because he made everything. Everything belongs to him. He can take anything whenever he wants. And there's nothing you could give him that is useful to him. Ki im asher et nafsho yisa. Rather, there is one thing that you could give God, and that is your nefesh. You can voluntarily offer to God yourself. And indeed, that is the intent of a sacrifice. When you come to with a sacrifice, you're saying, God, I have an issue here, because on the one hand, I want to totally give myself to you. But if I do, I will cease to be. And that's not something you want. So how do I live? How do I provide myself to you? How do I offer myself to you? So there's this symbolic act, right? Ki im asher et nafsho yisa, since the only thing you can give God is your soul, that should be elevated to be given over to him voluntarily. Ve'al kain, and therefore, behakriv karban laHashem, when one brings an offering to God, a sacrifice, tzarich adam lasim bilibo, a person must put inside their heart, ki et nafsho haya ra'ui lizboach v'lintoach v'lisrof. Really, it is his own nefesh that is worthy, that he is intending to put on the altar, to cut up and to burn. V'halavai sheyirtze bo hu yitbarach kasher haya chafetz b'yitzchak. And halavai, if only God would desire in him like God desired in Yitzchak at the Akedah. Okay, that is the proper intent and the sentiment, that the only appropriate sentiment of coming forth with an offering to God. Okay? So really, it's a replacement. All karbanot are a replacement for really the notion of offering yourself. Ubichlal hadavar, and included in this idea, yichaven, a person has to have the intention, bizvoach et ashor o et aseh, while he is sacrificing this bull or this sheep, ki ilu et atzmo hu shochet, it is as if he is slaughtering himself, uminateach, and he is cutting up himself, v'nizrak damo, and his blood is being thrown, v'nisraf, and he's being burnt, al hamizbeach, on the altar, kirbo, his innards, uchra'av, and his all kinds of organs, v'chelbo, and his fats, meaning all the choicest parts of him that would be burning on the mizbeach. V'hu etzleinu ma'amar katuv, and to us, with us, we have the verse, Adam ki yakriv mikem. So it says, in the Pasuk, in the Chumash, it says, and a man, when you offer from you a sacrifice. So the laws of sacrifices are introduced with the words, Adam, a person, ki yakriv mikem, when you bring from yourselves. Meaning when anyone among you that wants to offer to God. But the word mikem also means from you, meaning when you come to bring an offering from yourselves. Right? The whole act of bringing an offering to God starts with the thought of bringing yourself as a karban laHashem, an offering to God. As if a person is bringing his own soul. And only afterwards, then you can take this intention and bring from the behema, from the animal. Takriva and karbanchem, you will bring your offering. So the verse says, Adam, a person, ki yakriv mikem, when you bring from yourselves, min habeima, from the animal, takriva and karbanchem, you should bring your offerings. What does that mean? That means an Adam, a person, ki yakriv mikem, when you want to come close, when you want to offer yourself to God by coming close, mikem, from yourselves, right? Karban laHashem, to make an offering to God. So then, min habehema, from the animal, takriva and karbanchem, bring the sacrifice. But start off with bringing from mikem, from yourselves. Okay? Kilomar, as if to say, karban shalatz mechem, the offering, the sacrifice of yourselves, umar beha et, and then it includes the et, ki'ilu shnei karbanot, there's two offerings, there's two sacrifices when you bring a sacrifice, yachad, together. Who? Him, ubehemto, and his animal. So remember, the verse said, God didn't listen to, he listened and turned to Havel and to his offering, but he did not turn to Cain and his offering. Okay, why did God choose Havel? Because obviously Havel brought an offering that was supposed to represent himself. So he brought both himself and the offering, whereas Cain didn't. That seems to be the direction we're going here. Okay? V'navo el ha'inyan. Let's get to the answer. Amar, the verse is instructing us, ki Cain hevi mipri ha'adama. What did Cain bring from? The fruit of the earth. V'hu, ki hine, lemashelo haya yitrono rak al etzomeach. We noted last entry in the Alshech that Havel, while Havel was a shepherd, Cain was a farmer, because Havel had dominion over the order of living creatures, whereas Cain was on such a low level that he only had dominion over the earth. Right? So we said that therefore when he brings over here from the living thing, that's because he was only above that order of creation. Ki haya oved adama, he served the earth, or rather he cultivated the land. V'lo chash lahadif, and it never occurred to him to be better al habale achayim, over the living creature's animal life. Ayedei kishron v'avodat kono, through his working on himself, that he should be refined in his service of his Creator. Al Cain hevi tzomech. He did not have a latent talent or some sort of inner, predilection, a talent to serving God, but rather just serving the earth. And therefore, he brought vegetation. Shenit. Secondly, shelo hevi et atzmo. He did not bring himself, kiderech makriv karbanot laHashem, as is the appropriate way of bringing a sacrifice to God. However, Havel hevi gamhu. Hevi brought also himself. That's the extra word, who, that we know before. It says gamhu, also him, meaning he didn't just bring a mincha from the tzon, but he also brought himself. Kilomar, to say, Shelo hevi balei chayim bilvad, he didn't only bring living creatures on the altar for God, ki em gamhu, but also himself. Kilomar gamet atzmo. Ki tchila he'ele bilibo, first, right, he had a lofty notion in his heart, ki ilu et atzmahu makriv, as if he is sacrificing himself, im b'chorot zono, with the choicest of his flocks, v'chel vehen, and their fats. Nimtza, turns out, ki Hevel hevi shnei karbanot, Hevel brought two offerings, the inner spiritual offering of himself, and the physical offering of the animal, et atzmo v'et behemto, v'zehu, and this is the meaning of the verse, vayisha Hashem el Hevel ve'el minchato. That's why it says that God, it reports that God turned to Hevel, he accepted Hevel as a sacrifice, and also his physical offering. It seems that it would have been worthy to write initially, Shelo sha'a el Cain shehikriv tchila. Right? Cain, it seems, also gamhu, when it says by Hevel, that Hevel also brought, it seems that was a response to Cain. That Cain initiated this whole thing. Cain got it in his head to bring an offering. So Cain brought the offering first, and then Hevel followed. So why does the Torah report that God turned to Hevel, but not to Cain? It should have said that God did not turn to Cain, but rather he turned to Hevel. It switches the order, right? If Cain brought first, it should say how God responded to Cain first, right? And afterwards, let it say she'el Hevel ve'machato sha'a, that God indeed did turn to Hevel and his offering. However, when Cain saw that God turned to Hevel and to his offering, that's when Cain indeed said, oh, it's like Cain initiated the act of the offering, but he saw how Hevel gave a superior offering, including himself, and then actually he took a lesson from him. So the Alshech wants to say he even did respond in a correct way, right? And gamhu, also him, lechavein, in order to intend, ki'ilu, as if makriv et atzmo, he's also bringing himself. Velo shavalo, and yet God did not consider it equal to that of Hevel. Ki haya mitzvat anashim milumada. It wasn't for real. It was just an act, as we say, the commandments of anashim milamada. That is a phrase that Chazal used to mean when a person does something by rote without proper presence. That the mitzvot that a person does, it's like he learned in school in kindergarten, and there's no level of avoda or relationship as a mature adult in the act. So it's just by rote. It's an empty act. So here the Alshech is saying, even if Cain did indeed respond with a higher upgrade of intent after he witnessed Hevel doing it right, it wasn't really there. It wasn't a relationship. He just noted, there's something else that Hevel's doing, so he made a perfunctory kind of mechanical.
But he had already given it already.
Right, but it seems that as an afterthought, he floated up the intent also. Oh, and God, I should put myself in the mix there too. Okay, I don't know why. Well, we'll see. Okay, I think he's saying this because he's trying to, right, we see the question. The question is, why would God respond to Hevel first? So he wants to say that somehow Hevel introduced an element of the carbon in there before Cain. It's true that Cain brought the act first, but Hevel was the first one to bring that element first. And therefore, so when Cain put that intent, so then God said, okay, in terms of that element, Hevel proceeded, so God listened to that element of Hevel, but not that element of Cain. Okay?
It's interesting that when we talked about Adam and the Garden of Eden, that there was an upper garden and a lower garden.
Right.
And the upper garden was the intent.
That's the spiritual, right? The spiritual is always the yesod, right? That's the key component, the living, the neshama of the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, as then, vayichar lakayin ma'od. Cain, it reports, meaning on the heels of that, that the Alshech is noting that this difference seemed to be just in this element of bringing yourself. That's what Cain got very angry about. Why did you accept this element of Hevel and not mine? And when Cain became angry, that's when he made the critical error. Meaning it wasn't, when God talks to him and gives him a pep talk or a Musar, it's not because that his sacrifice is inferior. It's because of his response to this whole thing. Meaning, Cain sees this choice, and then he gets angry, and there seems, so God needs to straighten him out a little bit. God is such a loving, paternal presence here, right? And he says, meaning Cain now is going to make a critical error. We're not concerned about the errors he made until now. Now that he's angry, right?
The same thing with Adam and Chava.
Meaning it's always after, okay, this is Rabbi Nachman Torah. Rabbi Nachman says that the break between you and God and the relationship with God is not necessarily the moment of sin. But the true danger, the true vulnerability that you have to really losing your relationship is the moment after, where the Yetzer Hara finally, he presents himself to you and says, now you're lost. So that's when you get distracted, when you're the most susceptible to, meaning now you make the terrible error. Okay? V'hu ma'amar Ramzal, and these are the words of the sages, kinit paker v'amar let din v'let Allah. Okay. So, v'let agar taf. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, Blineder, next time, I'll find you the complete text of this ma'amar, and we could do it together. But basically, the gist is that Cain got angry and he said, there is no, and it seems like such a jump, because he's having a conversation with God. He says, you know what, God's not involved in the world at all. There is no balance here. It's just chaos and insanity, and there's no poetic justice,
So
and it's
what's
unfair.
the source of that?
The Chazal is saying, the Chazal is saying there's a medrash on this, that he became some form of heretic. And it's strange because he's having a conversation with God. So what is it? But he's saying, everything is wanton. I did the same thing that Havel did. And God chooses him, doesn't choose me. You know what? There really is no hashkach in the world. Everything we're experiencing is random and wanton. Right? Ma'abed nafsho. So what happened? So v'hine, ein safek, there is no doubt, ki hamit paker kach, somebody who becomes heretical like this, ma'abed nafsho, he loses his spiritual status, the status of his divine soul, u'meisir, u'mapil tselem elokim me'al panav, and he removes and drops the tselem elokim from his face. That's what it means, that Cain got very angry, and then it says his face fell. What does it mean his face fell? His divine countenance. Vizeo amro, and this is what the verse means when it says vayitlu panav, and his face fell. Ki hanikra panim be'etzem, that which is called the face in the atzmiut of the person on the spiritual level. Hu tzalmo, that is his divine form. Nafal mimeno, it fell from him. So now you have the next generation, another form of a loss of tzelem elokim after the chet.
Oh, this is like an additional
Level
loss
on the individual level for Cain. And it's not necessarily for all of humanity, because remember, we're not descended from Cain, even whether he did tshuva or not. But here is another case study, an example that the Torah gives us of a historical moment where a person falls. Even in that fallen state, you can fall even further. And on a personal level of even a smaller microcosm of tzelem elokim, of potential that person has, this person lost.
So you're saying that there was two falls, one of Adam and Chava, and a separate secondary fall of Cain.
Yeah, remember, as long as you exist, there's always some elemental, primal level of connection to God that you can. I mean, the whole point of a human being is to be able to project godliness in this world. You would not exist on any level as a human being if that was totally, totally remote from you. So on any level that humanity exists, there's always the potential to do that. So there's one new level of potential, another level of potential even closer that he lost.
But there was a physical expression of Adam's fall. Is there a physical expression of Cain's fall?
You mean that he became even more coarse and physical?
Yeah.
Well, there's another element of spirituality that is removed from him. So on some level, yes.
I'm wondering whether that's linked with the mark on his head. The fall.
The mark on his head is going to be a gift. It seems on the pit, right? Yes. But the truth is that the Zohar Kadosh says actually, and we have a tradition by the Tzaddikim, and from the Arizal and Chachmat Partzuf, that really everybody's sins specifically are on the Metzach, and that's why, the Zohar Kadosh talks about how important the Metzach is, and etc.
Right.
But that is something that one can restore. And a person can do tshuva from. So anyway, he doesn't get into it too deeply here in a technical way for the anatomy of a spiritual surgeon, but that's the phenomenon over here. There's the pasuk goes out of its way to say there's a new level called vayipal panav, and we know that from this life. We know that people lose their Tzelem Elokim. We know that the moment you get angry, your neshama leaves you. You should go to the mikvah if you get angry and do tshuva.
This is the first case of anger, right? We haven't had anger before.
Right. But it doesn't, right, it says v'chara, a lashon of anger, chari'af, right, to become blackened, to become black with anger. So, anger is like Oved Avodah Zarah, Shechina can't be shora on a person. So, when a person sins, right, their neshama, before a person sins, we say their neshama leaves them because it doesn't want to get tainted. So the Arizal says that a person has the imprint of Yud Kei Vav Kei on their physical body in 3 ways. There's 3 permutations. And your face is its own set. So that's the panav. So, that a person could lose their tzelem elokim on their face, but it can be restored. And tzaddikim in this world, they see that on a person. So I think that's the level we're talking about here. Okay, that a person has the meaning. Well, whenever we talk about that a human face, that a tzaddik projects Yud Kei Vav Kei on his face, or that Yisrael, when they wear the tefillin shalosh, right, Kishem Hashem Elekecha, right, Nikrei Elecha V'yoram Mimeka, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is seen on your face, and the Goyim will fear us, right? So that's the level here that even after the Chet of Adam HaRishon, a human being, a tzaddik, can have, or a person can lose. That's the panim. Okay? So that brings us to the end of this piece, to be continued.
Excellent.
Okay.
Chazak u'baruch.
Chazak ve'emetz.